2, 1. Good morning. This is Animal on Control. Welcome to the voice chat. These calls are pre-recorded for uploading to social media, and by joining a call, you are consenting to being recorded. Anyone wishing to join a call should email me at animaloncontrol@gmail.com, and I will reply with instructions. Today's topics: post-mortem on last segment, non-dog pet communities, and some remarks on land use regarding the keeping of animals. Joining me is Joe from Animal Abuse in Hungary. What is up?
Hey, how's it going? What's up?
I'm just living the dream. Maybe if it would stop raining for 5 minutes, I could get outside and do something. But in any case, diving in, the last segment seemed to really reach a lot of people and, shake things up, particularly in regards to sort of the unequal protections granted to dogs and their owners. And it's a point that actually I've been trying to make even last decade when I was blogging. Because if you consider, my interest in the space it became apparent to me early on, or even at inception, that dogs and dog people have powers, privileges, and protections that really no one else has, particularly people who are, I would say, similarly situated. And it's a big problem. It's dis-civic, anti-civilizational, and undemocratic. There's no good reason to give them all these privileges. And when I say privileges, I mean, they have been attributed the right, and I put right in quotes because no such right actually exists, but they have been attributed and assert this pseudo right to break all the rules and trash the rights of everyone around them. Now, and people need to be focused on that and keep that front and center, because that's the problem. Regardless of what your interest is, like which aspect of the space people tend to focus on, whether it's, murder mutt proliferation or barking or dog crap everywhere or dogs in places they don't belong, those problems persist because of that unequal protection scenario. And I say, protection where, okay, is every one of the, at least in the United States, is every one of these double standards necessarily, say, a 14th Amendment violation? Not necessarily, but whether that's the case or not, this scenario is ridiculously unjust, and it needs to change. That public policy playing field needs to level out, right? Dogs need to stop being treated like sacred animals and instead be, given the same protections as everything else with four legs. Same thing with dog owners. They are not an elite. I mean, they're treated like they're an elite group of people, but they're not. This is not a medieval aristocracy. Somebody does not become an elite person because of their pet choice, or should not be. They're treated like they are, but that's the problem. So people need to be focused on that. There's also something else came up. Somebody made a comment under one of my, I guess when I say recent, one of my videos where we're trashing search and rescue dogs. And somebody said, well, I disagree that these things, are never useful or totally useless or whatever. And I said, look, at no point have I said that no dog has ever done anything useful ever. Or if I have, I retract the statement. I never said that. The point I'm trying to make there, and I know like most dog people have room temperature and below IQs, so they're unable to pick up on the nuance, but everything is a trade-off. So, and what you see there is I know Kanan's going to pick up on this because I know he's listening and he's going to pounce on this. I say that totally good-naturedly, like Kanan is awesome, but it seems that they're pushing at some sort of reverse perfection fallacy. right? Where they're saying, okay, if these service dogs, say, are not totally useless, like if no service dog ever did anything useful, or if they ever did maybe one time in 100,000, then that's good. And my premise or my position is no. The minuscule, yeah, I can see that a few of them do something useful. Very few, but a few. That the minuscule amount of benefit added by these things does not make up for the fact that service dogs are a public nuisance and a public policy disaster. Okay, we'd be better off without them. And that includes even disabled people. So, and actually, pursuant to that, I appreciate what you said last time, because you mentioned that the service dog scenario in Austria does demand, a formal permit for the activity. And absolutely. As such, they're gone. Like, instead of seeing 5 a day, you see 1 every 2 years, which, again, essentially proves my point that 99.9% of them are useless, at least here in the U.S. So that was interesting. But anyway, we wanted to segue from that. And I might talk about that more further, maybe later in this segment or perhaps on another one. But we wanted to, or maybe even pursuant to that, segue into, dog cultists versus non-dog pet owning communities. I know you had some remarks on that. What are your impressions?
Yeah, well, well, the thing is, well, thanks for picking up this topic, because I know I suggested it. But it's this topic has been something that has been bothering me for quite a while, because just to give kind of a backstory, I myself used to be a pet keeper, but not a dog keeper, but I was into terrarium animals for quite a while, like actually more than 10 years. And like specifically, it was invertebrate terrarium animals, like insects or like spiders, scorpions, things like that. So, and this is also kind of I mean, especially scorpions are also a type of animal that most people probably don't like and would consider dangerous. But and yeah, some of them are. I mean, that's just a fact. I mean, there are certainly some species that I would never keep at home. But when you are in this kind of terrarium hobby, or probably in any kind of pet hobby, then usually you have some kind of a community. You try to connect with other people who have the same interest, and you exchange information and everything. And I did the same thing, like back then, we already had internet, of course, so you could find people on the internet, or you could find YouTube channels that were going on about particular pets that you would have, and you could find people even on the other side of the planet and kind of connect to them and exchange information. And like one thing I really noticed is that if you compare that pet keeping community, like it could not be further away from the dog nutters, because it's just like you would at least in that terrarium community, and even if I look at it today, you would never find these completely crazy people there. I mean, you would have the occasional nut job, of course. But mostly those communities, they usually keep to themselves. And I mean, they're of course happy when they get new members, new people that are interested or starting out in the hobby. But usually, people there, they try to, it's mostly about exchanging information, helping people that have problems, in the pet keeping or with their pets. or with their animals, and it's never had this kind of fanatical. There's never this fanatical side to it, that I've never seen anybody running around and going proselytizing about, I want everybody to have a gecko, and I want to take my gecko everywhere, and I want to see geckos everywhere, and
geckos
you
are
have to love geckos, and yeah, exactly.
Geckos are man's, but isn't it true that only geckos give unconditional love?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I want my service gecko everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's just, I don't know, I've never seen that. And I mean, I'm not a pet keeper anymore, but I still follow, one or two forums and some YouTube channels. And even if you look at the YouTube comments, which is usually a cesspool of insane people, but like even the YouTube comments to those videos, like you have 99% reasonable people, and they never really put their animals on a pedestal, and it's not, it's not a sacred animal. They don't have a sacred boa constrictor at home, or a sacred whatever tarantula. I mean, they talk about their animals like, yeah, they're animals, and that's what they are, and not more than that,
Right.
And they're not trying to push it into everybody's faces. And you have to get yourself a tarantula, otherwise you're just an animal hater.
Right.
And it has always puzzled me a little bit why this is the case with the dog nutters. I mean, you can go to any dog training video and you will just see you will see the exact opposite. You will see 99% comments of people who are, as you said, like already in the comments, you see that these people have room temperature IQs. And they then, even in the comments, they say, yeah, I have 5 pit bulls and 2 toddlers at home. And then you think you shouldn't even own a goldfish. I mean, like, what is it with these people? It's always been puzzling to me that why is it that the dog keepers they always attract these kind of immature, irresponsible people. And I mean, you can go to YouTube and go to any, I don't know, snake keeping video, and you will probably find 99% of people who are totally responsible, totally mature, and kind of down to earth, and who also say that, look, there are snakes that I would not keep at home because they are clearly dangerous, and if they escape, I will be crucified. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the thing is that I guess, maybe dog people. Well, first of all, actually, pursuant to what we discussed, well, last time, and actually from a conversation the year before, is that, and I don't know, maybe it's a chicken versus the egg argument, but it seems that, low intelligence level, immature, irresponsible people are drawn to the dog space. Right.
Yeah.
That's the pet for that kind of person for the most part. I mean, similar to what I said earlier. If you look at quote pet problems in society, 99.9% of them involve a dog, particularly if it's some kind of public nuisance. Occasionally, it's something else. Maybe one time in 1,000, it's something else. And mainly because all this other stuff is, well, first of all, in terms of public policy, it's restricted. I mean, I don't think you can have a king cobra as a pet in most places.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the other thing too is, these other talk about double standards. And I did a monologue on this last year. Was, pythons are fairly popular pets, at least here. And there's a problem with those also. But there was a case, it was in Florida, it was in Orlando, Florida, where a pet snake killed the kid.
Yeah.
Right. They had a 2-year-old.
I remember that. Yeah.
And you juxtapose that, like, go to dogsbite.org. It's like, again, you talk about like, okay, pet kills kid. If you had to bet money, what species of pet are we talking about? Right. Yeah. Alligators. No, I mean, again, 99% of the time it's a dog. And at 99% of the time it's a dog because only dog people are allowed to get away with stuff like that. It just happened in California where
Hmm.
a dog, well, the family was a family of pit nutters. They were breeding them also. It killed the 4-year-old daughter. They're not going to jail. In fact, they put up a GoFundMe to beg for money. But,
Yeah.
you juxtapose that with, and now I'm sorry, maybe I'm getting just a little bit off topic, but yeah, dogs are pets for low IQ, low maturity level, antisocial, irresponsible people. And yeah, I mean, owning a pit bull is probably per se irresponsible. And it's not only that, but it's like, I mean, I guess, is it possible in theory to own one responsibly? I guess, yeah, but none of them do, right? If
Yeah.
somebody did have a pet rattlesnake, they would be expected to keep it, yeah, confined in such a way that it would be unable to, attack anybody. And moreover, most of these other animals do not have the, inbred aggressive traits of at least many dog breeds, right?
Exactly.
Nobody is breeding snakes or tarantulas to, be aggressive in the way that nothing is aggressive in the way that a dog is.
Yeah.
Nothing's even close. So, yeah, it's interesting. Because because a lot of times people try to bring other pets into it, and it's like, I mean, bringing other pets or other categories of pet owners into it is only useful insofar as to illustrate the differences and the double standards.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I think it can be kind of a good means to show people how, because we've gotten so used to dogs being everywhere, and dogs and their owners having all the rights, and
Yep.
so that they can do whatever they want, that most people don't even realize it anymore. Because I mean, now also you have those 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, and for them they think this is normal, and they cannot imagine that 40 years ago or even 30 years ago that was totally different.
Yep.
And I think it can help actually to show people how this is not normal, and it shouldn't be this way. I mean,
Yep.
just look at other pets. And I mean, just out of interest, yesterday I I actually did a little bit, like 10 minutes of research on how many snake owners actually got killed by their own snakes. And the, like basically the only thing that I could really find were a few cases I think most of them were in the United States, where people got strangled by their own boa constrictors.
Yep.
And so, yeah, and I mean, of course, that is tragic. I mean, I'm not saying that doesn't matter, but I mean, you would probably, like, all the cases. I mean, you can count them on one hand, probably, that you would find.
Yep.
And I mean, that's going to be in all newspapers, and all the authorities are going to jump on that and say, yeah, we need more restrictions, and we need more
Yep.
regulations and
Yep.
everything. And yeah, I mean, look, as you said, you cannot own a rattlesnake, just because you want to. I mean, here in Austria as well, I know you need a permit for that. You need a permit for most scorpions, although tarantulas, for instance, like most tarantulas are about as dangerous as a bee. So, and even those many of them need a permit. So, and compare that to the dog problem, and that's just totally out of proportion.
Yep. Oh,
And
totally.
yeah,
Bringing to
and
snakes, you talk about what I mentioned earlier was I did a monologue on this, to sort of juxtapose. I don't know if I called it, but did I call it unequal protection? I forget. But there was a case in Orlando, Florida in 2009 where a pet snake killed the kid, the 2-year-old,
mhm,
right? So what happens? Both parents, I think it was a mom and a stepdad, but that doesn't really matter. Both parents were sentenced to 12 years in prison
yeah,
for, on a variety of, like, child endangerment, you know, reckless, reckless endangerment and manslaughter 2 or whatever, right? So they got, some pretty decent. They served out the 12 years also. It wasn't like they got a suspended sentence or they got paroled 6 months later. They served the 12 years. And then juxtapose that. Juxtapose means you do a reasonable kind of side-by-side comparison. Was about the time they got out of prison, there was that case in Tennessee where both family pit bulls, the 2 family pit bulls killed both kids, both of them, right? Both kids in a single attack, sent the mother to the hospital, no charges filed. And it was interesting. I was actually following them. I'm pretty good at finding people on the internet, and the parents have just moved on. If you look at the Facebook pages and the like, it's like the kids never existed. There's photos of them from before they had children and after, but it's like that, whatever, 2 or 3 year, because I think it was a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old were killed by the dogs. It's like they never existed. It's like it never happened, But that's the thing. Talk about protections given to dog owners or the lack of protection given to victims. It's interesting that children of snake people are protected by the state. I mean, it's after the fact, but children of dog people are not.
Yeah.
Even in cases when the dogs, shown aggression, the Tennessee situation, of course they claim the dogs had never behaved dangerously before, but there've been some anecdotal reports. Like I think the dogs, attacked the grandmother at one point prior. There's always prior aggression. The dogs were not pure and perfect, but yet the parents get off. Because again, talk about protection, the standards are like ridiculously high. You basically got to get them to confess, yes, I got these dogs to kill my kids. And if you don't get that, it's like, well, they're just perfectly innocent, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So, but the thing is you talk about other pet communities is that all that other stuff is restricted. They don't get the same amount of protection in the system. So if anything else, we're doing anything remotely like that, boom, gone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Gone. Because dogs are sacred animals, but none of these other creatures are.
Yeah. Yeah, and even if the dog actually gets put down, then you also see that the public reaction to it is totally different. Then everybody would go on, in the dog related case that, the poor parents not only have lost their kids, but now they have also lost their precious family dog. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that came up in
nobody would ever say that to the snake, that, oh my God, like those poor parents, they have lost their family boa constrictor or whatever it was. Yeah. So it's just so absurd.
They lost they lost their scale baby. And even you talk about other animals being killed. And if you go back to the thing is, animals are not people, and that's something else to always keep front and center. So, they're not always, entitled or have a right to, equal standing, right? So, and that's why and that's reflected in all kinds of ways, right? Like, for example, we talk about other, farm animals for existence. You can't keep them anywhere you want. I mean, sure, you can own a horse. They're not banned. But, either you have to, live on a farm, basically, if you want a backyard board, or you have to board your horse in a commercial stable that, has made all the proper arrangements. You can't just keep your horse anywhere you want. And for all kinds of good reasons. We make these, restrictions for all kinds of good reasons, animal welfare being one of them. And I think that was something that came up also, was that, again, like with the thing, one thing that makes dog owners different than most other pet owners is that, well, yeah, the dog, this isn't an animal that they like and care about. It's a religious icon, right?
Yeah.
It's for many of them. Again, I'm not speaking empirically. Everybody who owns a dog is not a dog worshiper, but many of them are. And they don't seem to care about the welfare of the animal that much, if at all. And that's very common also, because, yeah, you know, like talk about like your, terrarium animals, if they have, specific requirements in terms of, say, heat and humidity, and various other environmental concerns. And I've never had one of those, but, I'm aware of it. You got to keep the animal in a, socially responsible and humane way. You want to,
Sure.
Maintain an environment for it that's in the best interest of the animal, like with a horse, right? Can't have a horse unless you've got at least a couple of fenced in acres. And that's, stipulated in law in many, maybe not everywhere, but most places or something like that, because cramming a horse into a small suburban yard is cruel to the animal, right? They needed some space to run around in, right?
Absolutely.
And to graze in and so forth. Dog people don't care about those kind of things. They're like, I have a right to own any dog I want, anywhere I want, and do whatever I want with it, period. I was just driving, it was just the other day, actually, maybe 2-3 days ago, I'm driving out of here, and a couple of blocks away, I saw a woman and a young girl, I assume it was her daughter, walking a husky. Now, it takes a spectacular kind of stupid to think that a husky, which is a Siberian sled dog, in a Florida suburb, like, I mean, they're not, people are pit bulls are worse, but huskies are probably kind of a close second. Like, yeah, it's a Siberian, and interestingly, it's not necessarily a wild animal. It's purpose bred to pull a sled in snow all day.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, that's its breed, and it wants to fulfill, kind of like pit bulls have a inbred inclination to fight. That's what the husky wants to do. And lots of people in our space, people got turned to the dog critic community because they've got a neighbor with a husky, and the dog is barking and screaming and howling all day. Probably ostensibly because it's totally miserable.
Yeah.
Yet dog people think that's perfectly okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And but the thing is, really, no, you're talking about other animal communities. I mean, yeah, some animals are fine living indoors or on small properties. So you could say, okay, I mean, in theory, the husky as a pet dog doesn't work, but it's like, okay, fine. In our magnanimity, we'll try it. But clearly it's a disaster. Huskies just onto themselves are a public nuisance. They're probably the second most often dumped in shelters after pit bulls. Right. Mm-hmm. But everybody thinks, or not just everybody, but pretty much all dog people think a pet husky in a Florida apartment is a great idea.
Yeah.
I did a monologue on that because, when I got turned, not the current, one of the prior across the street neighbors had the nuisance barker. And mm-hmm. at the time, and this was over 10 years ago, but I snapped a video because I'd already threatened to sue them. I don't know if I sent the demand letter yet, but I said, okay, I'm done, right? I'm going to go, I'm going to nail them. I'm going to crucify them in civil court. So I'm trying to get evidence. So I didn't have a smartphone at the time. I had a bridge camera with video capabilities. You can look at this. Maybe it was, which monologue was it? I think it was called Deify Fido or something. And so they've got this yellow lab tied up in their side yard, where he was all the time, basically. And there's a thunderstorm in progress. Overclass, a pretty bad
Oh,
one,
I
right?
remember that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
that,
saw
and
it.
so I'm
Yeah.
standing on my front porch, which is covered, right? And I'm filming him. And of course, the fur parents are both home. I mean, they're probably passed out drunk, but they're both home. And this dog is outside just barking and barking and barking and barking. And I didn't expect this. So you could tell there was a lightning strike very close by. I think it was on the other side. So I'm about 50 meters from the dog, and I think there was a lightning strike maybe 100 or 150 meters away on the other side, right? And you can see it in the video. It's like there's a flash, and a
Yeah.
quarter second later, boom! And you can see the dog just like dropped to the ground. Some people watch it thought the dog got struck, and I almost dropped the camera. I'm like, holy shit, because it's like having somebody drop 1,000-pound bomb near your house.
Yeah.
It's really, we get wild weather here, even when there's not a hurricane. And I'm thinking, of course, do they go out and bring the dog in? No.
No.
No, they don't, and I'd mentioned that too. I'd actually told her, I said, your dog is totally miserable. Are you going to do anything about it? And she just tosses her hair and says, no, because I don't have to. That's what she said. They don't, because other people, I mean, again, it's not universal, but, other people are into other animals generally, care about the well-being of the animal, at least enough that they're not going to allow it to be perpetually miserable.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was funny, at the time, because, my stepdad was a dog person. And I was talking to him about that at the time. You know what he said? Because I shared that with him, and he said, you know what? That dog would be better off put down than living like that. This is from a dog. Well, the thing is, you talk about how things have changed. He's an old school dog person, right? He's a baby boomer. He was born in the 40s. So, I guess they had a different, more practical, and perhaps even a more humane attitude about it. But yeah, that's something else that I guess some people are going to point to this, that, or the other thing, like cat hoarders or whatever. But when you see something like that when the animal is so miserable, it becomes a public nuisance. That's pretty much a dog thing also.
Yeah,
the most.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also what you said, I mean, these are like two good examples, this the woman who left her dog outside in the thunderstorm, and also the huskies, in Florida, where they just simply don't belong. Like, if you did a similar thing actually in the terrarium community, then everybody from the community would jump at you.
Yep.
And would just tell you what a complete moron and what an imbecile you are.
Yep.
And would probably even report you, if they can.
Oh yeah.
But no, like look at the dog community. They're even kind of praising each other, and oh, look how cute, what a cute boy, and what a good boy, and everything. And like there's just, they don't keep each other in check at all. Like they even encourage each other to, just break more rules because we can.
Yeah.
We can.
Yep.
And this is something that you would, I mean, I never even saw that in the terrarium community. And I'm not, I mean, I don't know any other pet keeping communities, but I've never heard, the guinea pig people trying to have a competition about what rules they can break. I mean, I don't know, perhaps somebody has. I mean, I'm not into anecdotal evidence, but I mean, back then when I was in that community, I mean, we would have pounced on these people and said, look, you shouldn't even own, just go and buy yourself a cactus or something, but don't keep any animals. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I never hear that from dog owners. Like there's no criticism allowed. Like they all have to praise each other and lick each other's boots.
Yep.
And go on about, oh, I have this dog and I have the other dog and my boy did this and my boy did that. Yeah, I don't care what your boy did. Yeah. I never told anybody else what my tarantula was doing. I mean, it's just so childish. Like like what, like we were interested in real information, that like what kind of, as you said, what kind of conditions do you have to keep a certain species under, like what kind of humidity do they need, what kind of temperature, is it, I don't know, for tarantulas, for instance, you have tarantulas that actually live up in the trees, and so you have to consider that when you want to keep them. Others are terrestrial, so you have to consider that too if you want to keep them, and if you want to keep them happy. And these were the types of discussions that we had. We were not going on about, oh, look, my boy ate a cricket yesterday, isn't he cute?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just,
or even when they do things bad, like, yeah, my boy ate, the TV remote, and he needed $2,000 surgery, but isn't he great?
yeah,
Like, oh yeah, terrific.
dogs are awesome. Yeah, aren't dogs awesome? And
Yeah, it's like, yeah, that's just, well, everything they do, I guess it's complementary mutt theory. That's an idea I introduced recently, where anything that involves a dog, the actions or lack thereof, perhaps, of the dog are going to be put in the best light possible.
yeah, exactly.
And that's it, kind of that helps sort of prop up the whole service dog or police dog or search and rescue dog scenario. It's like, oh yeah, Fido was on site saving people.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, who did he? Well, okay, you had the dog was there and people were pulled alive out of the rubble. Did the dog have anything to do with it? Man, I want to give some more remarks on that. But yeah, this is a good topic. Yeah, it's a whole, well, thing, too, is, it is a cult. It's a religion, and they're all trying to sort of outdo each other on who worships or idolizes Rover the most. That's what's going on here. So that's what I'm saying. It's like it's not dog love or dog idolization really has nothing to do with a love or an interest in animals. Again, it's all about virtue signaling, genuflecting, social acceptance, right? Because they want to fit in with a social group. Oh, I got it, husky and in Florida, but isn't he cute? He and he ate my parakeet, but he's just the bestest boy, I mean, yeah, keeping a husky in Florida, talking about like other pet communities. Imagine if you were in a tropical fish community. And I know some people who've been into that, and that's talk about like environmental concerns. You have to, they're not like, say, a goldfish that's like room temperature water is fine. They have to be kept in warm, salt water. But imagine if somebody bought a bunch of tropical fish and dumped them into a bathtub full of ice water.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, the other tropical fish people would be like, that's well, again, it's animal abuse. You can't do
exactly,
that.
Yeah.
But when a dog person does pretty much the same thing, they're like, oh, that's great.
Yeah. Aren't they cute? Yeah.
One of the ironies here is that many people in our community actually care more about the well-being of dogs than the dog nutters, even though they accuse us of being animal haters and animal abusers and people who masturbate to, animal torture videos and all that stuff. When really, 99.9% of the abuse heaped on dogs is by dog owners, not people like us. Unless you really twist the meaning of abuse. Okay, a guy shoots the dog that's mauling his pregnant wife, and that's animal abuse, and it's an act of, intolerable cruelty, meaning that now you're twisting the definition of words and everything.
Yeah.
Well,
imagine that was a snake. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, if somebody,
wife.
right, if a python had been strangling his wife and he'd killed it, everybody would be like, good job.
Yeah. Exactly. And rightly so, rightly so.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, they're definitely in a class by themselves. And, one reason why they've got all these special privileges is, because they agitate for them. But yeah, we were talking about, the different animal owning communities and, how they, how dog people seem to be, quite a different from the rest of them. And even when they're not, you could say, okay, maybe some farmers like abuse or mistreat their farm animals, but the important distinction there is that those are zoned out farm animals, or it's something they have something like if you take like cats for example. A lot of people try with a cat distraction. Like, why do you have cats? Why don't you pick on cats more? And it's like, well, again, because 99.9% of pet problems involve a dog. But what's interesting was when you talk about like protecting these things, you're talking particularly other animal owners, like ranchers and farmers that have their like flocks of sheep. Sheepy's brought up that, some of these farmers, they get wiped out by these packs of loose dogs. Authorities don't care. Maybe like at most the dog owner maybe gets hit with a few $1,000s in damages, but that's it. Meanwhile, somebody else is first of all, you have a whole bunch of animals that are killed in the most gruesome and painful and horrifying way imaginable, right?
Yeah.
They're not just, you could say, okay, well, they were just being raised for meat anyway. But there's a difference between like, humanely killing something and on one hand, and on the other hand, basically torturing it to death. And that's what these dogs do to these other animals and humans. But of course, the dog people don't care. And interestingly, like, these other animal owning communities, I guess you're right. Like we discussed earlier, I guess too many people have just resigned themselves to living in this fascist dogocracy, right? So some neighbor's dog rips your pet to pieces. It's like, well, I guess it just sucks to be me, right? Yeah. That's a bad attitude. But what was interesting was, I don't know if you're familiar with Ken Phillips. Ken Phillips was a U.S.-based dog bite attorney. I think he was one of the first attorneys to dedicate his practice solely to dog attacks. And he's very anti-pit bull. He's not an adept. In fact, he said the first case he won was against it was a non-pit dog that bit off somebody's nose and swallowed it. So, but he is very anti-pit bull, but he did a monologue because he has a YouTube channel at one point about dogs killing cats, particularly pit bulls. And he's like, why don't cat people organize against them? But the thing to keep in mind is that, one difference between dog owners and everybody else is that, dog ownership, it's got all kinds of special protections because dog people are a political group. Yeah. They're a political demographic that gets, again, a lot of positive attention. Now, like cat people or owners of any other animals are not, these other animals have zero political capital. They're not a group that any politician or lawmaker or public policy expert gives a shit about. Like they're irrelevant. That's a point I make too when people point to some other animal. Interestingly, like the horse distraction is becoming very popular. It's like horses and horse people are totally irrelevant to the public policy environment. They don't matter. Yeah. Dogs do. Right. So if you want to say, OK, let's send the owners of dogs that kill to prison, all hell breaks loose. And that's, why, and that's the problem is they're very political. They agitate for their interests at every opportunity. And what really the cure for that is we need opposing groups to do the same kind of thing. They need to be agitated against. But that was the thing. And actually, I mean, I respect the hell out of Ken Phillips, but still, he doesn't quite get it. He's like, look, cat people or horse people or sheep people or whatever are politically irrelevant. They don't matter. Nobody cares, right? So the fact that, dogs are running loose, just laying waste to these other domestic animal populations in the current space doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, so true. It doesn't. Nobody. I brought up the story last week about a cat getting shot. No, they're not even. Forget about nobody going to jail. They're not even going to look into it. Nobody cares except the individual cat owner. Nobody cares. But, and I'm not saying that these other animals should have more protection in the system or more privileges, but I think that dogs and dog people have to have way less. Like the top needs to be brought down. But yeah, it's an interesting topic, and I mean, probably really just scratching the surface on the mentality of these people, because on one hand, they profess to just love dogs with a passion, but at the same time, they demonstrably do not give a shit about the well-being of the animal, even just letting their dog run the neighborhood. I mean, it could get into a fight with another animal. It could get hit by a car. All kinds of things could happen to it, but they're just oblivious to that. Going back to the whole dog. Oh, that's what we were talking about when we glitched. You brought up something very profound in the discussion the other week regarding, the policy in Hungary is what. This is how I heard it. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but the policy is if somebody hits a dog with a car, or accidentally kills a dog somehow, that's treated as an animal cruelty issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's how it works. Yeah.
That's nuts. I mean, I guess it's shocking, but not surprising, because they're agitating for that in other places. I mean, that's not exactly an original public policy goal. When you think about how crazy that is, I mean, even human beings aren't given that level of protection, and really nothing should. But I think, part of that is it's that, again, these are irresponsible people. So they let their dog run loose. It gets deleted by a car. Well, they're saying, I'm not going to be held. Who's accountable? Well, they hold the driver accountable. Now, in my opinion, if you're going to go after somebody for animal cruelty, like if there's an animal cruelty case to be distilled out of that, they should go after the dog owner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who turned the dog loose in the road in the first place? Like, who created the problem? Because the roads are for vehicles, perhaps pedestrians, to pass. We don't build roads to be dog parks, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's surprising that actually has to be said nowadays.
Yeah, it does. You have to be. We have to be. You have to assert your rights very forcefully with these people. But hold the dog owner accountable. But that's the thing is that, part of this, public policy environment is that not just the dogs themselves and the owners can never be held accountable or blamed for anything ever. So it's always somebody else's fault. So if they let their dog run in the road, which actually, in a lot of places is illegal, not that the laws are enforced. So you let your dog run off leash in front of a car. Not my fault, the fault of the driver. That's their attitude.
Yeah.
That needs to change. But it goes back to all the special protections they enjoy, unfortunately. So.
Yeah, that's right.
I wanted to, like I said, actually it was 2 weeks ago, the segment stirred up a lot of conversation. First of all, the whole unequal protection environment came up, and I think it's important that everybody stay focused on that. The other thing came up, people are always talking about, well, okay, how can I avoid this problem? And the answer is, well, currently you can't. The only way to do is to fight back against it in an organized way, in my opinion. But, people were, the conversations come up in the different living arrangements, sort of urban versus suburban versus, say, rural living, and as, Sheepy's pointed out, it's like, you can live in a rural area and still have, quote, neighborhood problems. Just, obviously, I mean, her case proves it, right? Like moving to the quote country is not a guarantee that you're going to be immune from these problems. But I would say, because some people are like, oh no, I totally wanted, my own farm or whatever. But, you have to, first of all, the problem is everywhere. Right. I mean, like I live in a suburban subdivision and dog problems are quite frequent, as I've noted. And in cities, I mean, it used to be that, living in an apartment, say a downtown apartment tower, typically they restricted pets or at least dogs. That's the other thing, too, was like dogs really don't belong in apartments, or very few toy breeds, maybe. But yeah, they get some, high energy working dog, cram it into an apartment. And not only is a dog miserable, but it makes all the neighbors miserable. It's a very, very common problem. These suburban subdivisions really used to be the worst, but I think recently not so much. I think they're probably not the worst anymore. Some folks have talked about, you hear about HOA communities. I know they have these arrangements in other countries, but to clarify, an HOA is a homeowners association. And typically what they have is it's an entity with, typically they have governing authorities. It's a private entity. It's not a government agency. It's a private entity that has typically governing authority over a neighborhood or a community. So, like, for example, a builder comes in, and these are quite common in Florida and even in other states. You had them in New Jersey also. Comes in, they buy 200 acres of land. They put 500 houses on it. But part of standing that up is they form, or an HOA is formed. And they do a couple of things. They can collect fees, HOA fees from the residents, right? And by buying into it, like if you buy one of these homes, you're agreeing, like in your purchase contract, to, essentially submit or adhere to all the rules and the bylaws of the homeowners association, right? And I know I'm really digressing. I'm kind of droning on. And, typically they have governing authority. Like they often have very strict rules. Like you can paint your house any color you want as long as it's white. So if you paint your house pink, they can fine you for that. If you let your grass grow too high, they can fine you for that. If you park a boat or a camper in your driveway, that's restricted, and they can go after you for that, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they also, they collect fees to maintain common areas, because many of these communities have amenities, like they have swimming pools, tennis courts, fitness centers, clubhouses, golf courses even. Right. So part of the fees you pay in, you're agreeing to pay the fees. I see that a lot of next door. They're like, yeah, I'm paying to maintain this golf course, but I don't play golf. And it's like, look, you agreed to the rules of the HOA when you bought the property. So it doesn't matter if you don't play golf or tennis. You agreed to pay the fees regardless. So too bad. Right. Now, some people think some of them have rules involve the keeping of pets, but surprise, surprise, that doesn't apply, or not never, but often does not apply to dog owners. So they could have breed restrictions or restrictions on the number of dogs or leash rules rules involving the, cleaning up of dog crap, whatever. Now, I also realize too that the HOA is also subject to the local jurisdiction. So the county or the township will have overriding authority, right? So even if the HOA doesn't have a leash law, if the county does, at least in theory, the county can enforce the leash law, right? Mm-hmm. So, but often, they'll have rules, but the problem is that, many of these HOA boards are corrupted by dog nutters, right? So they don't enforce the rules against the dog people, right? They do everything they can to protect them. And even worse, like if you complain, you get into trouble. Or if you have some kind of dog related problem, give you an example, and this has happened. I actually personally know people this has happened to, where again, the HOA will, set stipulations for the keeping of the property, right? Like you have to keep your lawn at least your front lawn in a certain condition. So if you get yellow patches all over from, say, dogs peeing on it, they'll fine you for that. Or they'll tell you, it's like, look, you have to restore it. But you can say, look, I don't even own a dog. We've got neighborhood dogs are peeing on my lawn. That's the cause of the problem. They say, too bad. Too bad. Your lawn, you need to deal with it. So they won't restrict the dog owners. They just, again, it's another example of all the additional privileges and protections they get. So your neighbor can kill your lawn, and then you're responsible for restoring. Now, at least where I live, I do not live in an HOA community. So if dogs pee all over my lawn and ruin it, I mean, I don't want that. That would be not good for me, but at least like the county's not going to fine me for that. So, but that's the problem. So if you're moving into one of these communities, you could be jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. Now, what you could do is, I would recommend if you do move into one of those communities, is get yourself put on the HOA board. So maybe you can, get your hands on the levers of those powers and maybe fix things. But in any case, that living in this apartment building, you can totally be overwhelmed with dog problems. Suburban subdivisions, you can totally be overwhelmed with dog problems. Now, if you look at, say, rural areas, people say, oh, I want to live in the country, right? So it's like, well, what is it, Brazil, right? What are they talking about, right? No, what they're talking to an area with a low population density, right? Where frequently the homes are very far apart, not always, but often. But of course, you got to perform your due diligence very carefully there also, because just because you own 100 acres doesn't mean that the house, your dwelling, is not going to be situated close to other homes. Yeah. So you could move out to some remote area, but still be situated similar to, say, a suburban subdivision, where you've got a close neighbor next door and another one across the street, even though you've got 200 acres behind you. So you got to perform your due diligence. What's situated around you? And also you got to look into the land use rules. Like, people hear me talk about, zoning rules. Like I'll say, okay, horses are zoned out of suburban communities. And I'm thinking, okay, what does he mean by that? What I'm referring to is that in the U.S. frequently, towns and counties are broken up into zones that indicate land use. Like, what are you allowed to do in this arbitrarily defined piece of land, right? Which can encompass, many separate properties. Like, for example, like in an area, if it's zoned residential, typically farm animals are not allowed. Like, I looked up, like in my area, the only farm animals I can own are, I can have 5 hens, chickens in my suburban backyard, not roosters. Roosters are zoned out, meaning if you want a rooster, you have to live in an area, say, zoned agricultural, because that's a different set of rules for that zone. So yeah, you can have a rooster there or a horse, provided there's usually other provisions for those kind of things, as I mentioned earlier. But you got to watch out. I mean, even outside of the dog space, and this happens as somebody, okay, you move out to an agricultural area. So you got a house on a couple of acres, and you're just surrounded by cornfields as far as the eye can see, right? You could do a 360. You don't have a house within a mile, right? So you're thinking, you know, the light goes on, like, this is perfect, right? Here's a problem is that, again, it's zoned agricultural. So meaning that, you know, agriculture activities are allowed so that corn doesn't just grow and harvest itself. So you've got all these, you know, farm type activities, because every year they got to till that land. They got to plant that land. They got to fertilize that land. They spray insecticide on that land. They irrigate the land. And then they, you know, harvest the crop. So you got all this stuff going on, which, you know, many people may find offensive. You've got dust and noise and smells coming from this agricultural activity.
Yeah.
But, you know, but that's the zone. You can tell, you know, you can't complain to the farmer. He's going to be like, fuck you, because you know what? And first of all, well, that's a little different than dogs, because growing food is arguably a social good, right? Unlike a backyard full of mutts. So you got to watch out. Maybe you think, okay, 90% of the time, none of that stuff is happening. So you're like, okay, you know, maybe, you know, it's a trade-off. So you always got to watch for those trade-offs. Your other, you know, situation is if you're in an area that's very remote, and I had some relatives who had an off-grid cabin in Vermont. Now it was a modern house. It had electricity from solar panels and batteries, and water from an, you know, on-demand well. So, you know, you could use it. Was, you know, it's a modern house. You want to watch TV, fine. You want to take a shower, fine, because all these, but they had all, first of all, you have to build out all your own infrastructure for those things, and that's very expensive. And it was on a poorly maintained dirt road. The nearest neighbor was about 2 miles away. So somebody would look at that, maybe in our space, say like, hey, that's perfect. But you got to evaluate the trade-offs, because, again, there's no public utilities. You have to build out your infrastructure for that. There's no mail delivery. They won't go out that far. You got to pick up your mail in town. There's no, or delivery of anything. There's no curbside or street side trash pickup. You have to put your trash in the car and take it to the county dump when it's open. It's a poorly maintained road in an area that gets a lot of snow. So you could be snowed in for weeks at a time. You need a 4-wheel drive vehicle with a lot of ground clearance. Like all those things are necessities. So, you know, so you got to, you know, evaluate that. Like I said, it's trade-offs. You got to say, okay, is all that worth it so I can, you know, basically have peace? You have to evaluate that, right? Because you're not going to have, because the interesting thing was that property was completely surrounded by national forest. So it's not like somebody's going to buy the lot next door and develop it. That's not going to happen, or it shouldn't happen. But yeah, you got to, you know, evaluate the trade-offs of living like that. So if somebody has an interest, they're like, yeah, I want to, you know, buy a farm and, you know, raise goats or whatever, fine, you know, but you just need to, you know, evaluate the trade-offs. And the problem is now with this dog problem, that's one more thing you have to be concerned with. So I wanted to make, you know, those points also.
Yeah. I think we talked about that last time a little bit, and I can actually confirm that for Europe as well. So, I mean, I know what it's like to live in the Hungarian countryside, of course, and I actually traveled all around in Hungary. So, like, if you really think that in Hungary, if you think that I want to have peace and quiet, so I'm going to move out to the countryside, I mean, that's probably the worst thing that you can do. because it's just, I mean, it's really everywhere, like everywhere I went, it's people have this mad idea about the guard dogs, you know, the guard dogs. We have to have a guard dog. And like even where I lived for 2 years, I mean, that's considered countryside, although it was technically it was a town, but I mean, in Hungary, everything outside of Budapest is considered countryside.
Right.
And so, I mean, I know how that worked out. So with peace and quiet. So in Hungary, that is definitely not going to work. If you live in a city in Hungary, now I actually read that a few years ago, the Supreme Court in Hungary decided that somebody who is like a house owner is not allowed to tell the people in the house or to limit their number of dogs that they keep in an apartment.
Oh,
So
jeez.
technically in Hungary, I actually found this article because there was a publication by the Hungarian Rottweiler Club, and you can imagine what type of people you have in that club. But they were rejoicing about that Supreme Court decision that now finally we can have our 6 Rottweilers that we always wanted to have, and we can have them in a 100 square meter apartment, you know. And they had to announce it big that what a big win for us, you know. So this is what you can expect in the city in Hungary. And for Austria, for instance, I can also confirm it that, I mean, I lived in Vienna, which is the capital. I lived there for more than 10 years. Now there you also have an ongoing problem with the dog shit everywhere, and with people having all sorts of dogs in their apartments. So you just hear the dogs, which are often left alone all day long while people go to work. And the dogs are just barking their heads off inside the apartments. And I mean, imagine you live next to that. So
Jeez, yeah.
good luck with that. And now I'm actually living in the countryside in Austria. So it's it's not too far away from the Alps actually. And even in
Nice.
the countryside, it's it's
I
yeah,
gotta
it's
say, in spite of the dog problems, I tell you folks, I've been out there. We tell you, it's nice.
yeah. Yeah. So
Sorry,
yeah.
I interrupted.
No, no, not
Proceed.
at all, not at all. I mean, I just wanted to say it's the same story with the countryside here as well. I mean, I moved here, yeah, 3 months. What was it? Yeah, 3 months ago. And, you know, not even here in the countryside, I got spared the dog-related problems. And yeah, I mean, it's not as bad as it is in Hungary, of course. But, you know, as you said before, like even if you buy a plot of land that is huge, like the problem is you can have a dog which is 1 kilometer away. If that is going to bark all day long, I mean, that's going to drive you insane. I mean, even if it is 1 kilometer away, you will hear that
Probably
perfectly.
hear it when you're outside at least, because that really gets into, acoustics and how sound travels. But it's a testament to how ridiculously loud dogs are.
Yeah,
Because if you've got that, yeah, I mean, if you're outside, I mean, given the landscape and the foliage and the like, you can hear that. You know where that's a big problem is in desert areas, like say in the American Southwest. Like I had commenters. I actually had a frequent commenter on my old blog, and she and her husband, I guess they, retired early. And I guess they lived in the city there. Maybe they lived in Phoenix. And they're like, okay, we're going to get away from the hustle and the bustle of the city. And we're going to get, guy kind of like my relatives in Vermont, we're going to get a remote property way out in the desert. But they say, yeah, their nearest neighbor is probably more than a kilometer, maybe a mile away. But if you go outside or open a window, all you hear dogs bark.
yeah,
And that's part of it's because, that landscape, or at least where they were, the land is flat, right? It's pretty
yeah,
flat, and there's no foliage because it's desert. So the sound just travels, forever. Fortunately, though, I mean, at least in their case, if you don't, at least if you don't hear it when you're inside, if you're subject to dog noise pollution when you're inside your home, that's the worst.
Yeah,
You shouldn't be having it outside either. That's the way it is here. I don't have, and I'm knocking on wood right now, I don't have any mutt nutter neighbors in close enough proximity to say wake me up in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
For example, okay. So that's a good thing, because one thing about Florida is unless the land is maintained somehow, it's going to turn into jungle. Like if you look at what's around me, because I back up to forest on two sides. So it's a suburban neighborhood. The homes are only on a quarter acre, but I live at the end of the street and I have forest on two sides. Now, behind me, like on the other side of that forest strip, there's a bunch of barky dogs, but it's probably about 100-meter buffer, but that forest is so dense because it is. You can't, if you walk, you can't, if you walk into it, you can't see more than 2 meters in any direction because everything, it's just, it's a lot of big trees. Everything is overgrown with vines. There's palmettos. The whole forest floor is covered with palmettos. So that helps buffer the noise. That lowers it quite a bit, as opposed to the desert environment where you don't have that. Now, the other thing too is if the landscape is contoured, if you have, say, if you live in an area that's mountainous or very hilly, that may help buffer the noise also. So, it depends on exactly, how it's situated. But yeah, moving, even if your closest neighbor, like I said, is, 500 meters away, depending on what they do, how they do it, and how the land is textured can make a big difference, right? They can maybe noise pollution, maybe they can't, so that's a kind of, I mean, it's not a sure thing, but yeah, probably seriously though, probably the best way to isolate yourself from that is to buy or live in a property without any close neighbors. Even though it's not foolproof, it's not a guarantee, certainly. I mean, nothing is, but still, it's better. You're better off having them 500 meters away than you are having them 10 meters away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly, I mean, it's a matter of degree. Plus, if you have a large property, because you can plant on it, right? Like I said, plants can soak up the noise. You can put in a berm. A berm is like, it's like a dirt wall essentially. And I read somewhere that a berm about 3 meters high, or say 10 feet or so, will block and lower the noise level about 10 decibels. And actually too, but at higher decibel, decibel scale is logarithmic. So if you've got the neighbor, say 200 meters away with the endlessly barking dogs, something like that could be the difference between, say, hearing them inside and not.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is too, but if you live in the city or a dense suburb, you can't do things like that. So you've got more options in a situation like that. Not that you should have to. I mean, think about it. If you have a neighbor that's a quarter mile away, all you hear are the dogs bark. You don't hear anything. You don't hear their other pets. You don't hear cats meowing. Or anything. All you hear, or that you don't hear them talking. You don't hear them start, unless they got maybe a Harley with glass packed mufflers. You don't hear the vehicles. All you hear are the dogs barking, because the dogs are so much louder than everything else, pretty much. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's actually insane that that you even have to talk about that and consider that, if nowadays, if you want to move somewhere, that you have to look at all this nonsense, just to make sure that you will not be driven insane. And it shouldn't be like that,
Well, I mean, Yeah, well, that's the problem is you have to add it to your, due diligence. I wanted to look up. It was funny. Now I can't. Let me see if I can find something because my county has. Yeah, let me share something real quick because this is kind of on topic. Let me see if I can share screen and land use permitting. So this is my county government. You can see this where it says land use permitting.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is when I talk about zoning. This is what I'm referring to. It's land use permitting for various arbitrarily defined pieces of land within the county, right? So buying a house, wants to keep livestock, build a deck or retaining wall. Knowing what is allowable and what is not can save you time and money. Now, again, dogs and dog people are above all this. Like, they don't have to. It's like they should probably put in here, except for dog people. Then like none of it's everything is completely NA. Just do whatever you want. It's all good. So making informed decisions about your current property or potential purchases. So. And I think probably most people in this space have probably been party to a home or a real estate purchase at some point. But, you always got to perform your due diligence regardless. Because like I said, if you're going into an HOA community, you have to get into the finances also. What you have to say, I want to see, bank records of the HOA. Like, are they bankrupt? Or are they flush with cash? What can happen is, if you remember, you weren't on that segment, but actually we were bashing search and rescue dogs, and I delved into there was a situation in South Florida where a condo tower just collapsed, but what happened was that one of the reactions to that was that all these other, because they have the same kind of thing. All these other, owner associations, like in the surrounding buildings, immediately like slap their owners with what they called a quote, a special assessment. Meaning they can do that. They can say, okay, if there's something that requires a lot of maintenance, they can just tack that on top of your usual fee charges. And some of these are so imagine you got this condo on the beach in Florida. You're all, pleased with yourself, and boom, these assessments can exceed in places like that in excess of $100,000. Because, that type of remediation is very, very expensive. So you also got to look into what does the county allow, right? So you might buy a house, but if there's another zoning is you can have properties that are zone resident or recreational, meaning no permanent structures. So you buy your 50 acres and you apply for your building permit and they say no because it's zoned recreational, meaning you can camp on it. Maybe you can park an RV on it for 8 weeks out of the year, but that's it. That's it, right? So it's too bad. Want to keep livestock, right? So if you move to my neighborhood, there's no goats or sheep for you. Sorry, right? Even some other things. Build a deck. There could be restrictions on swimming pools. They have all these, there's all these complex land use, requirements. So you need to do your due diligence. Just see, are there any like restrictive covenants? Because sometimes a property will have some sort of like easement or variance attached to the deed, right? Because often you'll have things like easement, like public utility easements, even railroad easements. I had some friends in New Jersey who bought a rural property in one of the farm counties. I think it was Warren County, on several dozen acres. And the property had a railroad easement. Meaning that the railroad company had a right of way through it, right? I mean, it's specifically laid out. They couldn't run a train anywhere. It's like, okay, see this line going through your lot. They have a right to use that. Now, it's interesting when they bought it, it hadn't been maintained in years or decades. There was like trees growing up through the ties and everything. They're like, fine. But then they're having breakfast one morning and the house starts to shake. Like, what is this, an earthquake? We know that the railroad company was, running, so they have a right to use that track. They have a right to maintain that track. Nothing you can do about it. So, so you got to look out for things, utility easements. The power company or the gas company may have a right of way also, and they have a right to access that.
Yeah.
I mean, so if you're okay with it, fine. But it always goes back to like dog people. Yeah, we got guard dogs. You set 1 foot in my property and Rover's going to rip your head off. But the thing is like, whatever, that railroad easement or gas company easement, that in a sense, that's they have a right to use that. They have a right to occupy that. You can have one, I know we're kind of drifting off topic, but it's a fascinating topic. Is you might, probably if you're buying a rural property, it might have a private cemetery. And that happens. And there's rules involving that. So if you buy a farm and there's a private cemetery, it's very likely you may have to grant access to the heirs.
Yeah.
Right, because those are the rules. They're like, look, they have. Now, of course, you wonder, like, okay, if the disposition of the remains was interesting to them, why did they sell the property? You'd think, okay, if you're going to sell the farm and move to the city, you would have your grandparents' remains, reinterred, say, in a public cemetery. But whatever, the laws in many, at least in many U.S. states, is like, if there's a cemetery on your property, you don't necessarily have to maintain it, but no, you can't just dig them up and get rid of them. Yes, you may have to allow the heirs to maintain it and access it within reason. So you got to look out for stuff like that. It's all, very, very interesting stuff. So, and, this is the other thing too, is maybe you could see if the land is zoned for, say, dog kenneling. Yeah, somebody could, move in nearby and with 100 dogs, and there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, provided they don't break any other laws, or even if they do, because again, with dogs, it doesn't matter. But the rules don't apply to them. But yeah, you can't, there's not really much you can do about it, because it's say, hey, you know what, provided they don't run at large or whatever, I can keep them here. So, or say an animal shelter. So yeah, it can get to be pretty complicated stuff. So I don't want to think, I'm not saying that moving to the country is a bad idea, but just simply that, it comes with a lot of trade-offs and you have to perform your due diligence. That's all I'm trying to say. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that was a point that caused a bit of surprise after the last voice chat. Like, I think even AAiH was talking about that. I think he lives in Ohio or somewhere.
He lives, I
I think
believe
in a
so.
city.
Yeah, in a city.
He was also surprised that you cannot even live in the countryside anymore. That I think after what Sheepy described last time, and in other voice chats, she's living in the countryside, and what she has next to her is just absolutely. That's just.
Yeah, it's appalling. It's just appalling.
That's just totally
bad.
appalling.
Yeah.
So if any of, just for all the listeners, if you think that I'm going to move to beautiful Europe, where I can spend my retirement in the nice countryside, well, you should do your due diligence, I guess. Yeah, as pointed out. Yeah, so it's not as easy.
I'm not saying, living, a lot of times it's, it's a question of luck, because I believe Sheepy really only has, she can chime in on it, that one close neighbor. And, unfortunately, was taken over by a level 5 dog nutter
Yeah.
Like that neighbor, she and I have communicated on that, privately also. It's like, yeah, that the person that's living there is extremely mentally ill.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got that's even beyond, like I said, they're definitely, you almost need to change the scale. They're almost like a level 6 nutter, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, they're destroying that property also. But, and you never know too, is like you could, I mean, you could, this, if you're in that situation, you could, you could sue them, get a, maybe even get a restraining order placed against them, because it's definitely a private nuisance. That's a legit civil complaint. Yeah, you could do that. There's other things I thought too, because I always wanted to like brainstorm. It's like, okay, what could you do? I mean, obviously, moving away is an option, but how confident are you? You're not jumping out of the frying pan into the fire.
Yeah.
Um, that there's a couple options there. I mean, well, one is, if they completely crater the value of the property, let's say it goes into foreclosure. Well, if you're affluent enough, you could buy it,
Mm.
right? And probably
Yeah.
just the house is probably uninhabitable at this point. Just bulldoze it and, maybe keep livestock there, just plant trees. So I've been tempted to do that. When the house across the street went up for sale, when the house next door went up for sale, I was tempted to buy it, which is something I could probably do in theory, but because then I can control who's in it, right? So, and Florida is very landlord friendly. So if the tenant brings in a bunch of dogs, yeah, I could probably, you can evict in less than a month, right? So I could just kick them out. So, I mean, provided you have the means, something like that's a possibility. The other thought I had too was, this goes for anybody with the neighborhood dog bully, is that if they're devaluing the value of their property, which they are in most cases, there's a few options. Like, one is you could contact their lender, and the lender is typically, if you go to your county government website, the lender is of any, whatever liens are against a property are typically public record. So you can find out who the lender is. So it's like, well, how does that matter? Well, the thing is that, a mortgage is provided they have a mortgage, it's a collateral loan. So the lender has an interest in maintaining the value of the collateral. So I think it's possible that if you were to report that situation to the lender, like Sheepy's in or Bad is in, he's got something like that next door to him, and you report it to the lender. The lender has an interest in, maintaining the value of the capital, and they can recall the loan. Meaning they could say, okay, because typically in the fine print is, under certain circumstances, they can just say, okay, you have to pay the balance in full or we're going to foreclose. We're going to take back the collateral. Because think about it, let's say you loan somebody money to buy a house, but it's a collateral loan, right? So, but if they trash the house, right, and not only that, but they crater the value, they devalue the nearby properties also. So the comps are going down. They've basically destroyed the collateral, or in the process of doing so. Wouldn't you have an interest in recalling that loan and, basically evicting them?
Yeah.
I think you would, because you want to get paid back. And it's the thing is, like, you take Sheepy's neighbor, for example. Let's say, yeah, they crash the value of that property and then go into foreclosure. Well, now the lender, I mean, it's probably some big bank, they might not care that much, but at least in theory, the lender would care, because now they got to foreclose, which is expensive, and they got to, recoup their losses by selling it. But if the property has $100,000 in damages, that's just going to increase their losses. So my thought is yeah, reporting it to the lender might be helpful. I mean, again, you're being kind of ruthless, right? You're saying, yeah, I'm going to get them kicked out of their house. The other thought I had was, to contact their insurance company. And that's typically not public record, but if you're clever, you can find out who the insurer is, because if they have, say, pit bulls or other murder mutts, many insurance companies will not insure a home that has pit bulls. Now, they don't check. They'll ask you on the form, like, do you own dogs, or what kind of dogs do you own? And they're like, yeah, I got 3 Chihuahuas, when they really have 12 pit bulls. They don't check. But if somebody were to report that to them, they may either cancel the policy or raise the rates. Now, if the policy's canceled, if the house is uninsurable, that may also cause the lender to foreclose or somehow recall the loan. I'm just thinking out loud. I'm trying to think of practical solutions to the problem. And then if the property does change hands, you hope whoever moves in is less crazy than the prior occupant. Because it's a game of chance, basically. You don't know. If you got neighbors that aren't into this stuff, you're basically just lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can do a lot of due diligence in that matter, but in the end, as you say, you can never calculate like 100% of all the possible outcomes, and
Yep.
so you just have to accept that, yeah, there is a certain element of luck in it. And
yep.
it's not even something that I would complain about. I mean, you can have loads of other problems that you cannot detect beforehand. So, before all the dog nutters will write in the comments that, yeah, but you cannot know, somebody might hear loud music in the night, and that's a much bigger problem than dogs, and blah blah blah.
Well,
we know all the red herrings, yeah.
Yeah, well, those kind of things, but that's the difference, is those things are restricted. Like you hear the dog nutters that complain about fireworks a lot.
Yeah.
As fireworks are only legal in my state 3 days a year. But barking dogs are legal 365 days a year. Does anybody see the discrepancy there? It's a false equivalence. Well, that's the other thing when you talk about public policy involving, say, noise pollution. My attitude at inception, because obviously, dog noise pollution is one of my biggest pet peeves, is that, we don't necessarily need a lot of new laws to deal with barky dogs. Just treat it like every other form of noise pollution. But because right now, dogs and dog owners are given all kinds of, protections. They're given lots of exceptions in that space that nobody else gets. And that's wrong. Because it's like, okay, why not? Because that's the thing is, if you got loud music at 2 in the morning, the police will come out for that. But if you got a barky dog at 2 in the morning, they don't. I mean, it depends on where you are. It varies. But, a lot of places there's all these other protections for the dog and the dog owner. And I say protections, meaning that the threshold for doing something, for action, is way higher. Because in a lot of places, they have things like there's consecutive disruption laws for dog barking. There's multiple household rules. So let's juxtapose loud music. You call the cops. And, if it's a slow night, if the officer comes out and witnesses the infraction, they hear it, they write a citation. And often if the behavior doesn't cure, like if the partiers just flip them off, he'll arrest him for disorderly conduct. Yeah. So that's how that's often handled. Now, if you got a barky dog, how's that handled? Well, you complain about that. First, you need to keep a barking log for X number of weeks Meanwhile, you're being noise polluted the whole time. You need to gather hours of video with sound evidence. You need to swear out an affidavit and have it notarized. And you also have to have multiple neighbors sort of co-sign the complaint. It's the infamous multiple household rule. So you've got all this. So in a barky dog situation, you have often, I mean, it's provided they do anything at all, you have all these extra burdens put on the complainant. Right? You have all these extra protections granted to the offender that nobody else gets.
Yeah. And
now going about other animals, like, I think last time we talked about, say, roosters, but and it even says so if you dig into this, zoning maps. Let me take a look at this. But in my zone, the only farm animals you can have are hens. Chickens, but no roosters. So, somebody put, I think it was actually because AAiH had brought these things up also. And somebody posted, I had a rooster next door and it was pure hell. Well, yeah, but roosters are restricted. And again, that's an important distinction. Because, there's clearly a distinction to be made between something that's allowed and something that isn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's like, it's not even like you don't have noise complaints about roosters because there aren't any. The rooster would be removed even if it weren't noise polluting. Like if I had a neighbor with a rooster, and let's say it was completely silent, I could call, the code enforcement people, right? Actually, probably this number. I don't know if they actually do the code enforcement, and say, you know what, there's a restricted farm animal next door. And they would come out and they would tell those people, you have to get rid of it. Yeah. Okay, either, you have 10 days to remove it. And if you don't, we're going to. So that's not, so like rooster noise pollution it's not an issue. It's not a question of, well, do rooster people get, noise citations? No, because they're not allowed to have them to begin with. It's like, well, if you can zone out roosters for the noise pollution issue, why are dogs allowed everywhere? But that's another layer of, protection they get. And it's interesting what you brought up with the, was it Hungary or Austria where they lifted like landlords basically can't restrict the number of dogs in rental
in
properties.
Hungary,
in Hungary. And they're actually pushing a lot of that here. And but you can't have anything else. Like, well, could I have like a half a dozen goats in my downtown apartment? No. Or an elephant, or it's like all that other stuff is restricted. So, and that's a point. I know I keep making that point over and over, but it's an important point to make, and people should point that out, particularly if you're going to get into the public policy space. Like, why is everything else restricted except that? And, say, well, dogs are man's best friend. It's like, you know what? I was the first man on Neptune. It's like, come on, Anyway, God. Yeah. Did you have any other thoughts? Because, I'm probably going to wrap it up in a few. It's
no. But if you have more things that you wanted to clarify from last time or to dig into deeper, I'll be happy to.
Oh yeah, it's a great time. Yeah, it's always a blast having you on. It's just that we've been on. I can kind of feel my voice is starting to go out, so I think it's time to wrap it up. So anyway, all right, I'll wrap it up again. Thanks for joining. Lots of great points made. So this is Animal Uncontrol, and as always, people first. All right, thanks, man.
Thank you. Take care. Right. Bye-bye.
Later. Bye.
Later.